Everyone in the diner ignored the little boy, frantically waving his hands for help. Only she understood what he was saying, and she answered. The boy's eyes lit up, as if she had just handed him the whole world. But she had no idea that his father was the most powerful and feared man in the city, the head of a hidden mafia empire, and that one small act of kindness would change all of their lives forever. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, a low hum, like a swarm of bees breaking loose, making Claire Mitchell frown as she stirred her coffee for the third time in 10 minutes. It was nearly 2 a.m, and this little diner was one of the few places still lit in the cold autumn hush of Minneapolis. No one came to Mickey's diner looking for joy or a hearty meal. They came because it was there just as Claire did. A 48-year-old woman with neatly tied brown hair, wearing a worn wool coat with frayed shoulders. Sitting alone in her familiar corner booth, the chair across from her was always empty, as it had been since the day her daughter, Emily, died of the cruel illness that had stolen her voice from birth until her final breath. Claire came here every night after her shift at the data firm, not because she was hungry, but because the silence of her apartment pressed on her chest like a weight. Here, amid the smell of burnt oil and the clinking of spoons against glasses, her sorrow blended with the background noise, making it a little less unbearable. She had once been a mother who held an entire world in her arms. Now that world was only a name etched into cold marble 15 miles away. Tonight was no different from any other night. Yet something in the air made her uneasy, a strange stillness, as if the world were waiting for something to happen. She didn't know that in a few short minutes she would see a pair of eyes she thought she'd lost forever, the same wide, quiet eyes that once belonged to her daughter, but this time they would belong to a stranger. A small boy sitting alone in the corner, whose presence would stir her sleeping heart back to life. Claire lifted her coffee to her lips, then froze. In the corner booth near the window sat a boy. Alone on the cracked red leather seat, he looked out of place in this diner at such an hour. His navy blue sweater was finely knit, his khaki pants perfectly pressed, his shoes polished to a soft gleam. Everything about him spoke of care, of privilege. But what caught Claire's attention wasn't his appearance, it was his hands. They moved rapidly through the air. Sharp, desperate gestures filled with panic. She recognized them instantly. They were part of her life for nearly a decade while raising Emily American Sign Language. A language without sound but filled with meaning for those who knew how to listen. The boy was signing for help. Clearly. Urgently. Yet no one seemed to notice, or worse. No one cared to. A waitress passed by, shot him a quick irritated glance, and walked away as if he were invisible. An elderly couple stood up to leave. The woman pulled her husband's arm to steer him away from the boy's table, as though avoiding a contagion. Even the cook behind the counter looked up briefly, then turned his back when the boy's pleading eyes met his. Claire felt her heart tighten. It wasn't just the loneliness in those eyes, though it cut through her like a blade. It was something deeper, a child crying out in silence, surrounded by adults who refused to hear. The harsh light fell across his pale face, accentuating the dark shadows beneath his eyes. The exhaustion of sleepless nights. He didn't look frightened. He looked sorrowful, a deep, unmoving kind of sorrow that no 9-year-old should ever know. In his gaze, Claire saw herself from 10 years ago. But there was something else, too. The sorrow wasn't only about loss. It was about rejection, invisibility, the quiet erasure of being unseen. Why was everyone turning away? Claire slowly set her cup down, her eyes fixed on the boy, and in that moment, she understood if she didn't reach out, if she didn't answer, he would vanish further into that silent void where no one dared to look. And that was something Claire Mitchell could not allow. Not again. She rose from her seat, her steps guided by an instinct older than reason. As she walked toward him, she felt eyes follow her. Though no one spoke, the air seemed to tighten. The boy looked up, startled, wary but with a flicker of hope trembling like a fragile thread. Claire stopped at his table, leaned slightly forward, and spoke softly. "Hi there." Then she lifted her hands and signed, her fingers moving with slow, fluid grazie. "What's your name?" For a heartbeat, the world went still. The boy's eyes widened in disbelief. Then his whole face transformed, as if sunlight had finally broken through weeks of rain. His eyes glowed with a vivid, childlike light, and for the first time since Claire entered the diner, he smiled. It was a trembling smile, full of gratitude and relief, as though someone had just pulled him out of the abyss. He nodded quickly, and his small hands began to dance in the air, fast and urgent. "My name is Eli. You understand me, you really understand me," Claire nodded, smiling gently as she sat down across from him. She signed back, her voice flowing softly alongside her hands. "I understand you. Perfectly." Eli placed his hands on the table, palms up, as if offering something precious. His eyes glistened with tears, but his smile stayed bright as morning light. "No one's ever talked to me before. They all just look and walk away." Claire swallowed the lump rising in her throat. She looked at Eli for a long time, wanting to tell him that he was not invisible, that he was seen, that he mattered. She signed slowly, every motion heavy with sincerity. "You deserve to be heard. You are not alone." The light in Eli's eyes was so intense it nearly blinded her. It was the light of a soul being reborn. The world around him illuminated for the first time, and in that instant, Claire Mitchell was no longer the lonely woman running from memory. She had become an anchor for a boy she had never met before, whose life, and her own, they were about to intertwine in ways neither of them could yet imagine. The bell above the diner door gave a long, metallic ring, as if it had been torn from its hook, and every sound in the room instantly died. Claire was just about to ask Eli why he was here alone when the door opened and a group of men in dark suits stepped inside, their footsteps echoing on the old tile floor like the knock of fate. They didn't speak. Their eyes swept across the room, sharp and rehearsed, and they spread out with silent precision. The waitress behind the counter froze mid-pour, stepping back as if hypnotized. The cook peered through the kitchen window and immediately disappeared. Claire turned and saw every diner lower their heads or shrink into their seats, their eyes fixed on the tables, afraid to even breathe. No one screamed. No one ran. But fear spread through the air like thick smoke, choking the room. Then he walked in, the last man, and clearly the one they all revolved around. Tall, broad-shouldered, his black hair slicked neatly back, his face chiseled and cold as stone. The charcoal suit fit him like armor, and his gray eyes sliced through the room like a blade. Claire didn't need more than a second to know this was not a man anyone could stand against. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to threaten. He was the threat. When those eyes landed on the table where she and Eli sat, every muscle in her body went rigid. Eli shot up from his seat, hands trembling as they signed in panic, his lips moving soundlessly. The man strode toward them, knelt until he was eye level with the boy, and to Claire's disbelief, the ice in his gaze softened. His large hand brushed Eli's cheek, smoothing the boy's hair with a touch so gentle it felt almost sacred. Claire's heart raced as realization struck. This was the boy's father, but not an ordinary one. The way the men stood guard, the way the entire diner seemed to hold its breath, and the way no one, absolutely no one, dared to meet Eli's eyes told her everything. The man rose slowly, his gray stare locking onto her. His voice, deep with a trace of Italian accent, cut through the silence like a verdict. "Who are you? How do you know how to speak to my son?" Claire wanted to step back, to lie, but Eli's small hand found hers and held tight. In that moment, she knew she had crossed into another world, not hers, but one of shadows, power, and deadly secrets. The man studied her for a long time. Then a thin smile curved his lips like the edge of a knife. "I'm Dominic Bennett, and you, Miss Mitchell, have just become very interesting to me." Claire couldn't remember saying yes, or even being asked. Everything happened so quickly that one blink later, she was no longer the woman sitting alone at 2 a.m. When Dominic Bennett turned and gave a subtle nod, one of the men in the dark suit stepped forward, inclining his head politely but with eyes that allowed no refusal. Eli still clung to her hand, his gaze pleading. as if her leaving would sever the fragile thread that had just connected them. So Claire followed, unsure whether it was fear, curiosity, or the silent plea of a child that made her move. The black SUV glided through the night like a silent predator. Claire sat in the middle row. Eli pressed close beside her, Dominic motionless in the front seat. No one spoke. No one asked questions. Beyond the wind's murmur and the pounding of her own heart, Claire understood one thing clearly. She was no longer in control of her fate. The car turned down a tree-lined road, and a tall iron gate swung open automatically before them. Claire caught her breath. Behind the stone walls stood a mansion straight out of a Gothic novel, 3 stories high, with arched windows, carved balconies, and a garden trimmed so precisely it felt unnatural. But it wasn't the beauty that chilled her. It was the unmistakable sense that this place was built to keep people out. And perhaps, to keep someone in. She was led inside through a marble-floored hallway, each step echoing as if in her own mind. The golden wall lights did little to warm the air. Dominic stopped in the grand foyer and turned toward her. "This is the safest place for Eli," he said, as if stating a fact. "And now, it's where you are." Claire wanted to ask why, but the question caught in her throat. He didn't ask for her help or offer any explanation. He simply looked at her, as if she had become part of his world from the moment she signed her first word. An older woman appeared on the staircase, dressed in black with a face as strict as iron. "This is Mrs. Hawkins," Dominic said. "She'll arrange your room." Then he turned away without another word. Claire stood there, lost in the vast hall. She knew this feeling. She had felt it after Emily's funeral, standing in her own home that suddenly felt like a cage of glass. Now she was trapped again, not in memory, but in a very real, very powerful world with no way back. She followed Mrs. Hawkins down a long corridor. Each footstep stretched thin by the unnerving silence that filled the house. The air inside the Bennett estate carried a peculiar scent, a blend of aged oak, dried flowers, and something metallic, faint yet unsettling, like gunpowder clinging to elegance. Large oil portraits lined the walls, men in old-fashioned suits with sharp, proud eyes that seemed to follow her every move. Claire felt as though she wasn't just walking through a mansion, but through layers of buried history sins that these walls had witnessed and would never confess. Through an arched doorway at the back, she glimpsed the garden vast, immaculate, not a single leaf out of place. But what made her stop was the sight of figures in black, moving silently through the shadows. They weren't ordinary guards. They moved with the precision of soldiers, every step calculated. Their eyes never turned toward her. Yet she knew they had marked her presence the moment she arrived. Cameras glinted in every corner. Sensors gleamed under the eaves. And the thick glass of the windows told her one thing for certain: they were bulletproof. Mrs. Hawkins led her up the main staircase, her hand never leaving the carved dark wood banister. The air grew colder as they climbed, as if the height itself served to distance them from the living world. At the top, she stopped before a large wooden door, opened it slightly, and gestured inside. "Guest quarters," she said flatly. "Breakfast at 7. Then she turned and walked away without another word or glance. Claire stepped into a room larger than the apartment she once called home. But even with the golden lamplight, the feather pillows, and the perfect view of the back garden, she felt cold, not from the air, but from the unmistakable sense that this place wasn't built to welcome people, only to contain them. When Claire awoke the next morning, the silence was so absolute, she felt as if she had woken inside a museum rather than a house. The clock showed past 7, yet there was no sound, no footsteps, no voices, no smell of coffee or eggs sizzling in a pan. None of the human warmth she associated with morning. She dressed quietly and stepped into the hallway, following the heavy silk-covered walls down toward the main floor. In the dining hall, Mrs. Hawkins was waiting, hands folded neatly, her gaze sharp as a blade behind silver-rimmed glasses. She didn't invite Claire to sit or ask what she wanted. She merely pointed to a lone chair by the window. On the table, a plate of toast and fruit sat untouched beside a steaming cup of tea. arranged with perfect order and no trace of care. Claire tried to break the silence with a soft thank you, then asked gently, "The boy, Eli, is he?" "Well, Mrs." Hawkins paused, her mouth tightening before she spoke. "The young master is as he always is," she said, eyes darting away. Claire caught the avoidance in her tone. An invisible wall she wasn't meant to cross. "No one speaks to him," Claire pressed. "Mrs." Hawkins looked at her for a long moment before answering carefully, as if choosing words that wouldn't disturb some unspoken rule. "He doesn't like to talk. And no one here knows how to talk to him." "No one learned sign language?" Claire asked. Incredulous. Not the cook. Not the housekeepers. Not even the guards. No one. "Mrs." Hawkins replied softly but firmly, "We are told to keep our distance. It's safer for everyone." Claire felt a chill run through her. Distance, as if Eli were a danger. Not a child. A child who needed to be seen. To be understood. "Mrs." Hawkins added, "He's bright. Polite. But Mr. Bennett has his reasons. We don't interfere." Claire sat quietly, her gaze drifting out to the manicured garden, where red and gold leaves fell soundlessly onto grass trimmed to perfection. A boy trapped in a gilded cage, surrounded by adults too afraid to reach him. She didn't know the reason behind it, but deep down she understood if no one else dared to cross that invisible wall, she would be the first and perhaps the only one. That afternoon, she saw Eli standing alone beneath the great maple tree at the edge of the garden. He wore a light gray sweater, hands tucked into his pockets, head bowed slightly. Sunlight filtered through the golden leaves, painting his shoulders with warmth that couldn't quite reach him. Claire walked toward him slowly, her shoes crunching softly over the dry leaves. When she was only a few steps away, she stopped, not wanting to startle him. Eli glanced up, caught her eyes, then looked away again, as if he had learned that adults only ever passed by, never stayed. Claire said nothing. She simply sat on a nearby stone bench, pulled a soft caramel candy from her pocket, a habit she had never dropped since Emily, and carefully unwrapped it. She placed it on her palm and extended her hand toward him. Eli hesitated, studying her as though unsure whether this kindness came with strings attached. Then, cautiously, he stepped forward, took the candy, and nodded in silent thanks. Claire smiled, raised her hands, and signed slowly. "Good." A simple word, easy to remember. Eli blinked. Then, after a moment of thought, copied her gesture awkwardly, but with concentration. Claire nodded in approval, then signed another word. "Thank you." He repeated it, and this time, a faint smile appeared on his lips, small and fleeting, like the first ray of sun after a long winter. But for Claire, it was enough to make her chest tighten. She continued teaching him small signs. "Hello? Happy. Mother. Beautiful day." Eli didn't speak, but his eyes grew brighter with every gesture. His fingers moved slowly, sometimes clumsy, but no longer afraid. She could see it, the yearning to connect, shining in every glance he lifted toward her as if to ask, "Did I get it right?" and the tiny flicker of pride when she smiled in encouragement. They sat there in the quiet afternoon garden, no words spoken, only wind, light, and two pairs of hands building a bridge across silence. After a while, Eli signed hesitantly. "How long will you stay?" Claire looked at him for a long time, then signed back. "As long as you need me." Eli blinked, then suddenly stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her. His embrace was small and fragile, but held her tight enough to break her heart. Claire returned the hug, closing her eyes. It felt like holding Emily again, but this time, it wasn't about loss. It was about beginning. From the second-floor window, Dominic Bennett watched them in silence. He didn't speak or signal anyone, only exhaled slowly. His eyes, usually cold as winter glass, softened with something perilously close to tenderness. Claire Mitchell, a stranger, had just made his son smile, something no one in this house had managed for years, and he knew it was not a small thing. Not at all. In the days that followed, Claire spent most of her time with Eli in the West Library, a quiet sanctuary of sunlight and dust. Tall windows reached the ceiling, pouring golden light across old bookshelves and velvet carpets. In that hush, they built a private world out of a language no one else around them could understand. Claire brought vocabulary cards, colored paper, and her own simple sketches just as she had once done for Emily. But Eli was different. He was a closed door slowly opening, inch by inch, to the patience of her quiet care. One afternoon, Claire wrote 3 words on a sheet of paper: happy, sad, angry. She laid them on the table, signing each one, her face changing with the emotion, smiling wide for happy, slumping for sad, tightening her fists for angry. Eli watched intently, his eyes absorbing every detail. When it was his turn, she let him choose. He pointed to sad. His hands shaped the sign carefully, and when his eyes met hers, Claire couldn't speak. His expression wasn't imitation. It was truth, a sadness that had lived in him too long, like smoke that never clears. Claire signed softly. "Can you tell me why you're sad?" Eli looked down at his hands, then signed slowly. "Because no one listens. No one sees me. No one wants to understand." Claire felt her heart twist painfully. She nodded, then took his hand and wrote in his palm, "I see you." Eli looked up, his lips trembling faintly. She went on to teach him signs for worry, hope, lonely. He learned quickly sometimes, even correcting her hand shapes, his movements growing surer, freer, as though speaking this silent language brought him back to life. He wasn't just a boy learning to communicate. He was a soul rediscovering himself. The afternoon ended with Eli signing the word warm, a word Claire hadn't taught him. But he remembered it, from the way she had held him beneath the maple tree the day before. He learned through feeling, through love, not just through memory. Claire froze, watching him closely. The last rays of daylight slanted through the glass, turning his hair the color of honey. His dark eyes were deep and steady, his cheeks still round with childhood. Yet his expression carried a serenity far beyond his years. She no longer saw him as a child with a disability, but as a small angel trapped inside the shell of silence, a soul isolated in a world no one dared to enter. And now, she was the first to knock. A part of her ached for the injustice he had endured, but another part felt a quiet warmth, because she knew that from this moment, Eli would never be alone again. Not as long as she was here. Never. That evening, Claire sat alone in the library, sorting through the vocabulary cards Eli had learned that day. When the door opened softly, she looked up to see Dominic standing there. The door hadn't even creaked, yet his presence filled the room instantly. He wasn't wearing his usual tailored suit, but a charcoal turtleneck, one hand still holding a folder unopened. Claire stood, flustered, unsure what to say. But Dominic stepped forward first, placed the folder on the table, and looked at her. "I just wanted to thank you," he said in a low, steady voice. "You've done what no one in this house has been able to do for years." Claire smiled faintly, uncertain how to respond. "I only talk to your son. That's all." Dominic nodded slowly and sat across from her, a rare gesture. He leaned back, folding his arms, his gaze softer than usual. "You know," he began, "I hired 3 sign language specialists, 4 private tutors, 2 therapists. They all quit after a few weeks." Claire tilted her head slightly. Because Eli didn't trust them, Dominic nodded. He wouldn't sign, wouldn't look at them. "But with you, everything is different." Claire hesitated, then asked gently, "Did you ever try to learn sign language yourself?" Dominic blinked, surprised by the question. "I did. When I found out he was deaf, I learned the basics to tell him I love him, that he's safe, but I'm not good at it. I'm not the right person to teach." Claire nodded softly. "You're his father, not his teacher. Maybe Eli doesn't need to be taught. Maybe he just needs someone patient enough to listen." Dominic was silent for a long time before he spoke again. He used to be the only reason I believed I still had something human left in me. After his mother died, I thought I'd closed every door in my heart. But then Eli came silent, fragile, and I realized there was still something worth protecting. I built this world to keep him safe, and instead, I made it his prison. Claire looked at him, and for the first time she didn't see the cold, untouchable figure she had met that night in the diner. She saw a father, wondering if he had done enough. Her voice softened. I don't think Eli needs you to be perfect. He just needs to know you're there, that you love him, and that you won't leave. Dominic turned toward the window, where the last amber light traced the edge of his profile. Maybe, he said quietly. Claire Mitchell, you make me believe things aren't completely lost. And in that moment, within a house built on silence and fear, something shifted. The space between them narrowed, quietly and naturally, as if it had always meant to. That night, after dinner passed in its usual heavy quiet, Dominic sat alone in his office. The desk lamp cast a pool of gold over the folder he hadn't managed to read. His mind replayed what he had seen earlier, Eli beside Claire in the library. The two of them signing, laughing softly, their world sealed off from everything else. Dominic had grown used to the silence surrounding his son, to the way others spoke for him, decided for him, avoided touching his life at all. But Claire had changed that without force, without fear, only with patience and kindness. A gentle knock came. Dominic looked up. The door opened, and Eli peeked in. Dominic immediately stood, a rare smile flickering across his face. Come in, son. Eli walked forward slowly, but without the hesitation he once had. He stopped in front of his father, lifted his gaze, eyes bright with quiet determination. Dominic knelt to meet him. What is it he signed? Eli raised his hands and signed carefully, each movement deliberate. Claire, she's the only one who understands me. Dominic froze. He had seen his son sign many things, but never had Eli used the word only for anyone. The boy continued, his small hands tightening. When I sign with her, I don't feel invisible. I feel real. Dominic felt his throat tighten. He placed a hand on Eli's shoulder, his gray eyes softening. I know, son. He signed back. I see it too. Eli smiled faintly, then leaned forward and hugged him just a moment, but enough for Dominic to feel the warmth returning to arms that had been cold for far too long. In that brief embrace, he understood the woman downstairs hadn't just taught Eli to communicate. She had given him back something Dominic thought was gone forever, faith in human connection, and that, to Dominic Bennett, was more precious than power itself. Far across the city, in the upper floor of an old factory building, a man stood behind a dusty pane of glass, peering through binoculars toward the glittering lights of the Bennett estate. Caleb Morgan didn't smoke, but he held an unlit cigar between his fingers, a habit of men who think long and wait longer. His prematurely silver hair and the scar running from jaw to ear gave his face a permanent half-smile. Half-threat. A younger man beside him shifted uneasily. They're guarding it tighter than a bank vault, he murmured. Guards at every corner. Cameras everywhere. The kid barely ever leaves the house. Caleb lowered the binoculars, his eyes narrowing. But now, he said, they've made a mistake. The assistant frowned. What mistake? Caleb turned, laying the binoculars on the table cluttered with surveillance photos, blueprints, and intelligence notes. He tapped a finger on one of the pictures, Claire sitting beside Eli in the garden. That woman, he said. The boy clings to her. Claire Mitchell. No family. No tías. No one to come looking for her. An ordinary woman caught in an extraordinary mess. She's the weak link. You mean, we take her? The assistant asked. Caleb shook his head slowly, a thin smile curling at the corner of his mouth. No, we take the boy, but we use her as bait. He sat back, folding his hands as if reciting a calm morning report. Dominic Bennett is slipping, not because of money or power, but because of emotion. She's the first person to make that kid smile in years. And Dominic, that ruthless bastard, is softening. Caleb leaned back further, eyes glinting like a blade measuring its cut. When a man like Dominic lets someone from the outside into his son's world, that's when he opens the door to his own destruction. The assistant nodded, his voice firm. I'll make the arrangements. Caleb's smile deepened, slow and deliberate. No noisy, no chaos. Just enough to remind Dominic Bennett that his empire isn't untouchable anymore. He turned back toward the faint glow of the distant mansion, his eyes bright, not with ambition, but with the scent of blood and opportunity in the air. This time, he murmured, he won't just lose control. He'll lose everything he tried to keep alive, starting with the boy, and ending with the woman who made him human. The next morning, sunlight poured through the tall windows of the library, turning the room into a golden haze. Eli sat beside Claire, carefully arranging the cards she had taught him yesterday, his eyes sparkling like glass catching the sky. His hands moved quickly as he signed, laughing softly, the way children laugh when the world feels safe. For once, his expressions weren't the strained efforts of someone trying to be understood, they were pure joy. Claire watched him, her heart swelling, and tilted her head. Do you want to go outside? She asked with her hands. Eli looked up, startled, then nodded so eagerly he almost toppled from his chair. Claire left, brushing his shoulder lightly. Then I'll ask your father, but only if he says yes. Eli hesitated, his eyes flickering with worry. But she signed again, gentle and sure. Trust me. Dominic was in his office. As usual, when Claire knocked, he looked up to see her enter, calm but clearly hesitant. Do you need something? He asked, his tone guarded as ever. Claire stood tall, her voice steady. I'd like to ask permission for Eli to go outside for a while. There's a small park not far from here. I'll go with him, and there will be security. Dominic set his pen down and straightened, his gray eyes narrowing. No, it's not safe outside. Claire took a step closer. You said this place is home, didn't you? Then Eli deserves to live like a child. Not a prisoner, just 1 hour in the sunlight. By the pond, with the ducks. Dominic studied her for a long moment. Claire didn't plead, didn't flinch. What he saw was patience, trust, and a love for his son that no one could counterfeit. Finally, Dominic sighed, the sound more like surrendering to himself than to her. All right, but 2 men will follow you closely. You will not step out of their sight, not for a second. If there's even a hint of danger, they'll bring you both back immediately. Claire nodded, relief flooding her chest. Thank you. Dominic held her gaze a moment longer. If anything happens to Eli, it won't. She cut in softly but firmly. Dominic's jaw eased. I believe you. Claire, not because of your words, because of how he looks at you, and for the first time since they met. The wall between them wasn't a barrier. It was a fragile bridge they both chose to trust. The black SUV rolled quietly to a stop along the cobblestone road that led to a small park, where the maple trees burned in shades of red and orange. The season's first true whisper of autumn. Claire stepped out first, scanning the area instinctively. 2 plainclothes guards stood at a distance, their eyes never leaving her or Eli. The boy hopped from the car, eyes sparkling like morning water. It was his first time outside the mansion since Claire had known him, and perhaps the first time in years he had felt the air of freedom meant for children. The park was serene, still as a painting. A few joggers passed by. An elderly woman sat knitting on a bench, and beyond the path shimmered the lake, where ducks glided lazily across the water. Claire handed Eli a small bag of breadcrumbs. His tiny hands trembled with excitement as she signed. You can feed them. Eli hurried to the water's edge, sprinkling handfuls of bread, watching with wide eyes as the ducks competed for crumbs. He kept signing back to her in bursts. It's eating. That one's so fast. Look. It's calling. Claire laughed, nodding, answering every sign as if together they were composing a silent symphony. Then, suddenly, a large duck flapped up onto the shore, snatching bread from Eli's hand. He stumbled backward and fell into the grass. Claire's heart jumped, but she stopped herself when she saw he wasn't crying. Instead, he threw his head back and laughed. Not the quiet smile he used to give. Not a breath of amusement, but real laughter. Soundless yet alive. Bursting from his chest with pure joy. Claire froze, her eyes stinging. That laugh, though silent, rang louder to her than any symphony. Eli kept laughing, rolling on the grass, his mouth open in a soundless cheer, his face radiant, as if the whole universe had suddenly lit up inside him. The guards exchanged awkward glances, then turned away, unwilling to break the fragile beauty of the moment. Claire knelt beside Eli, resting a hand on his shoulder, her heart swelling with a kind of happiness she hadn't felt since losing Emily. Pure happiness, wordless, unconditional, just the laughter of an angel who had lived too long inside silence. The autumn breeze whispered through the maple leaves, ripples shimmered across the lake. Everything was so peaceful that for a brief, dangerous moment, Claire forgot that the world outside still hunted its prey. Eli sat by the water's edge, carefully crumbling the last pieces of bread, his smile soft and lingering. Claire sat on a nearby stone bench, holding his jacket, her gaze tender and watchful. The guards stood a few yards away, speaking quietly into their earpieces, eyes scanning the park out of habit. Nothing unusual, no suspicious movement, just a perfect morning, whole and safe, until a sharp, dry sound cracked the air from somewhere far away, so faint it might have been mistaken for a branch breaking. But Claire heard it, and every instinct in her body screamed, "Danger." She shot to her feet just as one of the guards collapsed, blood spraying from his shoulder, the earpiece tumbling into the grass. It all happened too fast to think. A scream echoed from across the lake, followed by a second shot, then a third. Claire ran toward Eli. The boy turned, eyes wide with fear. She shouted, even though she knew he couldn't hear, her hands signing frantically. Down now. Eli froze, confused, and Claire lunged, shoving him to the ground, covering his small body with hers just as a bullet sliced through the air. The impact slammed into her side. A brutal hammer blow that tore the breath from her lungs. Pain exploded, sharp and burning. But she didn't move. She couldn't. Eli tried to lift his head, trembling, reaching for her hand. Claire forced her fingers slick with blood to form signs. "It's okay. You're safe. Stay down." Around them, Cheos erupted. The remaining guard returned fire, shouting into his radio. Tires screeched nearby. Doors slammed. Voices barked orders. Claire barely saw the black-clad figures rushing toward them before another wave of pain dragged her down. She tried to stand, to pull Eli up, but her legs refused. Each breath came ragged, shallow. Eli clutched her hand, tears spilling, signing desperately, "You're hurt." Claire shook her head, forcing a weak smile. Her bloody hand brushed his cheek, tracing a single sign into the air. "Run." Another explosion ripped through the park, closer this time. The world blurred. Someone grabbed Claire, dragging her aside, while another hand tore Eli from her grasp. She tried to scream, to hold on, but the scene spun away into chaos. Through the haze, she saw Eli's face as he was pulled toward a waiting black van. His lips moved around a single word she could still read even without hearing. "Claire." Then he was gone, swallowed by the vehicle that sped away, leaving a cold, bleeding emptiness on the grass. Claire collapsed, reaching toward the space where he had been, warm blood spilling across the green, mingling with the lowering light of the autumn sky. Sirens wailed somewhere distant, but for her, there was only silence. Silence and a loss too vast for any sound to contain. The call reached the Bennett estate less than 10 minutes after the van vanished. Dominic was in a meeting with 2 senior advisors when his phone erupted with alarms, and a guard burst through the doors, pale and shaking. "The boy's been taken." "Sire." The words sliced the air like a blade. Dominic shot to his feet, the chair crashing behind him. His face hardened to stone, the light in his eyes extinguished. In all his years running the family, he had weathered betrayals, ambushes, the fall of rivals, but never this. Never Ellie, his only son, the last living piece of his soul, the one thing that had kept the darkness inside him from consuming everything. Dominic slammed his fist against the table, shattering the crystal glass. Blood ran down his knuckles. But he didn't bother to wipe it away. Get every man I have back here. Now. We start with the last person who saw the getaway vehicle. Immediately, the order rippled through the mansion like an earthquake. The once silent halls erupted into chaos. Security rooms lit up with surveillance feeds, guards scattered like hornets from a broken nest. Yet amid the storm of rage, one thought burned steady in Dominic's mind. Claire. He stormed toward the estate's infirmary, where she had been brought after an emergency procedure at the city hospital. She was alive, hit by a bullet that grazed her side, losing a dangerous amount of blood, but still breathing. Dominic entered quietly. Claire lay pale and still, hair damp with sweat, a thin line of pain crossing her brow. He stood there for a long moment before taking her hand, his voice breaking into a whisper that trembled with fury and grief. I'll bring him home, he vowed, even if I have to burn this city to the ground. That night, he convened his captains in a closed-door meeting. The name Caleb Morgan surfaced again and again each time, followed by a heavy, deadly silence. He was the only man ruthless enough, reckless enough, and with motive deep enough to target Eli. Dominic sat at the head of the table, his icy composure barely holding over the fire beneath. He touched my son, he said coldly, and there will be no corner of this earth where he can hide. Rising slowly, his presence filled the room with dread. From this moment, every pact, every treaty, every line of peace is void. Anyone standing with Morgan stands against me. Open the armories. I don't want an investigation. I want a war. And only one ending Eli returned alive, or the heads of everyone involved laid before me. The light in Dominic's eyes had changed. It wasn't rage alone. It was a consuming fire of a man who had been stripped of his last sanctity. Eli wasn't just his son. He was the line between Dominic Bennett and the devil himself. And now someone had crossed that line. They would pay not only in blood, but in soul. Claire awoke under the dim light of the temporary infirmary inside the mansion. The antiseptic smell, the rhythmic beep of the monitor, and the dull ache in her side told her she was still alive. But when memory surged back gunfire, Eli's tiny hand torn from hers. The black van speeding away, she bolted upright, gasping. Eli, she whispered hoarsely, fumbling beside her for someone, anyone. The door burst open. Dominic was there. No longer the cold, controlled man she knew. His eyes were hollowed by sleeplessness, his jaw dark with unshaven stubble. His expression, a collision of anguish, fury, and despair. He rushed to her side, gripping her shoulders. Easy. You're safe now. Claire stared at him, tears streaming down her face. Eli, they took him. I couldn't. Dominic's hand tightened, his voice rough. You're not the only one in pain. I let him go. I said yes. The fault is mine. Claire tried to argue, but her strength failed. She grasped his hand, eyes pleading. We have to find him. Dominic. I saw the man who took him. It was Morgan. Wasn't it? Dominic's gaze hardened, a glint of cold hatred breaking through. Yes. He didn't just take my son, he declared war. I've set every contact in motion. We'll tear apart his network until there's nothing left. Claire trembled with anger and helpless fear. She could feel Dominic's wrath like a storm pressing against the walls. But beneath it was something raw, terror, the fear of being too late. Dominic looked down, his voice low. Claire, if I can't bring him back, don't say that. She interrupted, breath quickening. You will bring him back. We will. Dominic nodded slowly, as if anchoring himself to her belief. In that fragile instant, they were no longer a mafia lord and a sign language teacher. They were simply two people bound by the same wound, the same child, and the same vow to not lose him, no matter the cost, Night fell thick and heavy, wind howling through the mansion's tall windows. In the infirmary, Claire lay still, eyes closed, feigning sleep. But she had been awake for hours, awake and waiting for the guard's footsteps to fade, for the rhythm of the night watch to loosen. She couldn't stay here. Not while Eli was somewhere out there scared. Alone. Unable to speak to anyone who would understand his signs. Dominic had locked down the estate. No one came or went without clearance. But Claire knew one thing more powerful than orders Eli's trust. And if anyone could read the signs he left behind, it would be her. She carefully removed the IV line, pulled the monitor plug, and swung her legs off the bed. Pain seared her side, sharp and hot, but she gritted her teeth, tightening the bandage around her ribs, throwing on a long coat and pulling the hood over her face. She slipped out through the back conservatory that opened into the orchid house, a route she'd memorized days ago. No one saw her leave. No one imagined a woman fresh from surgery could vanish into the night. But Claire Mitchell had never been the kind to wait in fear. She was a mother, and she didn't need blood to know Eli was part of her heart. On the old bus rattling toward the eastern docks, Claire stared at the last photo she had taken with Eli. In the corner of the picture, the boy's hand formed a small, subtle gesture, a private sign, only they shared. 2 letters intertwined, C and E. Eli's way of saying, "Claire and Eli, you and me are one." But this time, the sign wasn't made by his fingers. It was shaped with 2 pebbles placed side by side in the grass. A secret code. A silent language they had invented, a game she once thought was just play. Now she knew better. Eli was sending her a message. She could almost hear his voice in her mind. "If someone takes me, I'll leave signs. Don't let anyone else see. Just you." Claire stepped off the bus and moved quickly through the fog-damp streets along the harbor. The warehouses loomed like dead giants, their paint peeling, their lamps flickering weakly through the salt air. She searched the ground, scanning every puddle, every patch of dirt. Then she saw them 2 small stones near the curb. One white, one black, pressed together beneath a graffiti-stained wall, unnoticed by anyone passing by. But Claire knew. He's been here. She followed the trail, an overturned tin can by a rusted post. A scrap of blue cloth caught on a latch. Each mark matched what she had once taught Eli, a silent map of distress. Every step she took was a battle between hope and fear. If she misread a sign, if she hesitated too long, Eli could be gone again. But somewhere deep in her bones, she felt it, he was waiting. The wind off the sea grew colder as she moved between the derelict warehouses. The narrow passage, echoing with the hollow sound of her footsteps. The air smelled of rust, salt, and old oil, sharp and metallic, like the memory of something broken. But Claire didn't stop. She reached warehouse 37, its steel door slightly ajar, an old padlock hanging loose. On the lower edge of the frame, scratched faintly into the metal, was a mark only she would notice, a thin line etched down into a shape that meant nothing to the untrained eye, but everything to her. It was an E, stylized, carved by a trembling hand. Her heart hammered against her ribs. He's here. Claire bent low and gently pushed the door open. Inch by inch, inside, the warehouse was swallowed in darkness, lit only by the faint strip of light filtering through a vent high in the back wall. The air was so still she could hear her own heartbeat echo through the hollow space. Step by step, she moved forward, her footsteps soundless, careful not to disturb even the smallest shard of debris. The smell of mildew and dust filled her lungs, sharp and heavy. After a few seconds, her eyes adjusted to the dark. In the far corner, she spotted a smaller room with a closed door, but a narrow slit beneath it let out a thin line of dim light. She dropped to her knees and peered through. For a moment, nothing. Then a movement, subtle, trembling. A small figure curled in the corner. Eli. Her throat tightened, tears threatening to spill. But she swallowed them down. She couldn't make a sound, pressing her fingertips to the dusty concrete just outside the slit. Claire began to draw slow, careful strokes. The first sign, safe. Then another, I'm here. Each movement of her finger was deliberate, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Inside, Eli froze for an instant, then began to crawl closer. A pair of dark eyes shimmered in the gap between light and shadow. Frightened, but aware. He had seen her. Claire bit her lip, then wrote again, "Be quiet. I'm coming to get you." Eli pressed his small hand to the floor, drawing symbols back, signs only she would understand. "They locked me in. One man. Gun. I'm scared." Claire breathed deeply, forcing herself to stay composed. She nodded even though he couldn't see her, because she needed to believe. Then she drew one last message. "Trust me. Close your eyes. Count to 10. I'll bring you out." Eli traced a reply. "I trust you." Footsteps echoed faintly down the hall, heavy, uneven, and too close. A man's dry laugh carried through the air. Claire backed away fast, crouching behind a pile of broken crates. Her fingers slipped into her coat pocket, wrapping around the small knife Dominic had once given her for protection. The blade was barely the length of her palm. But in that moment, it was everything. The air smelled of rust and fear. Yet one truth steadied her heart. Eli was alive, and he was waiting. Claire Mitchell wasn't a soldier. But for him, she would become whatever she had to be. Tonight, she would fight, not with strength, but with a love fierce enough to pierce the dark. The footsteps grew louder, echoing through the iron ribs of the warehouse like a drumbeat of doom. Claire pressed her back to the wall, every muscle locked. The knife clutched so tightly, her palm began to bleed. She glanced toward the slit under the door. Eli's eyes were still there, trembling but fixed on her. Claire placed a hand over her heart, tracing a small shape in the air, a heart. Then she nodded once. The footsteps stopped. The rusted door swung open with a metallic shriek, and a flashlight beam sliced through the dark. Claire closed her eyes for a single heartbeat, then sprang up from behind the crates, charging toward the intruder with every ounce of will left in her body. It wasn't rage that drove her, it was terror. The terror of losing Eli again. But she barely made it 2 steps before a rough hand clamped down on her shoulder, spinning her around. And there he was, Caleb Morgan. He smiled, a slow, venomous curl of the lips. "I knew you'd come. Claire, I even bet my men you wouldn't stay hidden in Dominic's cage." Claire struggled, trying to keep the knife behind her. But Caleb was faster. He grabbed her wrist and twisted hard until the blade clattered onto the concrete. He stooped to pick it up, holding it to the light. Dominic's knife, how poetic. His grip on her arm tightened as he dragged her toward the locked room. Eli's silent scream tore through the dark as Caleb shoved Claire into view. She managed to sign quickly, "I'm okay," but Eli only shook his head, tears streaming down his cheeks. Then, the door behind them burst open again, not with footsteps this time, but with gunfire. The first bullet struck the metal post beside Caleb, forcing him back. A voice thundered through the chaos, commanding and cold. "Let her go." Dominic stepped out of the haze, framed by flashing lights from the SUVs waiting outside, dressed in black from head to toe, coat flaring behind him. He moved with lethal precision, both hands steady on his guns, eyes fixed solely on Caleb. Caleb laughed, awing Claire closer, his arm tightening around her throat. "You're late, Dominic. Your son's still sitting quietly in there. And this woman," he sneered, "is far too predictable." Dominic didn't answer. His finger squeezed the trigger. A volley of gunfire roared, and Dominic's men stormed in through both doors, flooding the warehouse in chaos. Seizing the moment, Claire drove her shoulder into Caleb's chest, shoving him off balance. Dominic was already moving, his shot cutting through the air, the bullet lodging in Caleb's shoulder before he could react. The room exploded into violence. Gunfire, shouts, bodies colliding. Blood splattered across the rusted walls. Claire crawled toward the locked room while Dominic charged ahead, trading fire with Caleb. Her lungs burned, every breath laced with smoke. With trembling fingers, she unlatched the door and pulled Eli into her arms. The boy's body shook uncontrollably. She held him tight, shielding him as bullets tore the air around them. "You're okay," she whispered into his hair, though her voice was barely a breath. Eli clung to her, small hands gripping her coat, as if she were the last solid thing in a crumbling world. Dominic didn't stop. In his eyes there was no negotiation. No mercy, only the cold certainty of vengeance. Caleb stumbled across the floor, blood soaking his sleeve. Still clutching a pistol, Dominic advanced, slow and silent, his gun raised. He said nothing. He didn't need to. His gaze alone passed the sentence. Caleb tried to smile, but before the smirk could form, Dominic pulled the trigger. The bullet struck between his eyes. Silence fell, heavy and final. Claire lifted her head, tears blurring her vision as she watched Dominic step toward them. Not the ruthless crime lord anymore, but a father who had just won back his child from the mouth of death. In her arms, Eli looked up, eyes glistening. His lips moved soundlessly. "Dad's here." Outside, dawn began to break over the harbor, washing the blood and smoke from the sky. The cold morning air was sharp, metallic, and heartbreakingly clear. Dominic's men lined their vehicles outside, cleaning up the aftermath, collecting the dead, wiping blood from the concrete, as if it were just another task in a long night's work. But in the far corner of the warehouse, where Claire and Eli sat pressed together on the floor, the world had gone still. No more gunfire, no more violence, only the sound of a boy's uneven breathing and the steady heartbeat of the woman who had risked everything to bring him home. Dominic moved forward slowly, his body still stained with blood, eyes hollow from sleepless nights and unbearable strain. But when he saw Eli curled safely in Claire's arms, the child's small hands clutching her waist as though never to let go again, he stopped. No one spoke. Only Eli moved, turning toward his father. Then back to Claire. His tiny hands rose, deliberate and trembling, every motion fragile, as if afraid to shatter something sacred. He shaped his fingers into the outline of a roof, then placed it against his chest. Then he looked straight into Claire's eyes, no interpreter, no hesitation. "Mother." Dominic froze. Claire did too. For a moment, time itself seemed to stop breathing. She gathered Eli close, tears spilling freely down her face. Dominic looked from his son to her, and in his eyes flickered something beyond words. Release. Sorrow. Redemption. Something no amount of power or vengeance could ever touch. Eli lifted his hands again, signing once more, this time turning to his father. His lips formed a faint whisper. But Claire understood. Family, the boy had chosen. And the two adults, who had both lived years, armored in silence, finally understood what fate had been leading them toward. Not coincidence, but loss transformed into love. Later that night, Dominic stood alone on the stone terrace of the Bennett estate, gazing out across the back lawn, lit by the soft glow of garden lamps. No guards, no voices, just the whisper of wind and the faint clink of glass against his fingers. Half his face was bathed in warm light from the drawing room behind him. The other half disappeared into shadow like his life for the past 8 years. The glass door opened softly. Claire stepped out, wrapped in a thin coat, her wound still aching but her eyes alive again. Dominic didn't turn, but his voice came low, as if he had been waiting. "Eli's asleep," she nodded, coming to stand beside him, hands clasped for warmth. "He's sleeping deeply." Before he closed his eyes, he signed, "You're my mother." Dominic pressed his lips together, a fleeting smile breaking through the fatigue. "And you didn't deny it, did you?" Claire didn't answer. She just looked at him and waited. Silence stretched between them, delicate and necessary. Then Dominic spoke, his tone slow, each word drawn out like something painful being pulled from his chest. 8 years ago, my wife was killed in a hit, deliberate, not mistaken. They wanted to remind me what it feels like to lose something human. I arrived 10 minutes too late. 10 minutes. If I'd been earlier, maybe she'd still be alive. If later, maybe I wouldn't have had to see Eli sitting beside her body, his hands covered in her blood. Not crying. Not screaming, just staring at me like the world had already ended. Claire turned away, tears stinging her eyes. Dominic set his glass down, staring into the darkness beyond the garden. After that day, he stopped speaking. Not because he couldn't, but because he wouldn't. The doctors called it trauma. I called it punishment. He chose silence. For me, Claire reached out, gently touching his hand. It wasn't your fault. Dominic gave a tired smile, not the cold smirk of a mafia boss, but the weary smile of a man who'd carried too much. I was a beast. Claire, for years I kept Eli hidden, taught him everything but how to feel safe. I hired the best, but never gave him what mattered: connection. I thought if I loved again, I'd lose again. Then you walked in, a stranger, broken but brave enough to step into our darkness, and brought back what I'd buried too deep: trust. Claire whispered. You never lost it. You just forgot where you left it. Dominic met her gaze. Claire, I'm not good with gentle words, but this I know without you. Eli wouldn't smile. He wouldn't call anyone mother. And I wouldn't be standing here as myself. Her hand tightened over his loven. For a moment, there was no past. No pain, just two people finally meeting where their scars aligned. The wind rustled softly through the trees, wrapping them in quiet stillness. The moonlight spilled over them, gentle and silver, softening the edges of his weary face and catching the warmth in her eyes. Neither spoke. It felt too sacred to break. Then Dominic's voice rose again, deep and unsteady but certain. I don't know what the right moment is to say this. Claire, I've never proposed to anyone with a heart this exposed. But if I let you walk away now, I'd lose more than the woman I love. Claire turned toward him, eyes meeting his, the same eyes that had once terrified her, that she had once thought she'd never understand. Now, all she saw was a father who had given everything for his son, a man learning to believe in love again, and the only soul who had stood beside her through her own quiet loneliness. Dominic took her hands in both of his hands used to command fear, now trembling with tenderness. Stay. Be my wife. Be the mother of my son. No diamond rings. No kneeling. Just a simple truth spoken from the heart of a man who had finally found peace. Claire didn't answer right away. She looked down at his hands holding hers, then back into his eyes and saw no control. No possession. Only a quiet invitation. A promise that love here would mean freedom. Not fear. I once lost a daughter, she whispered, her voice trembling, and I thought I could never love another child. But Eli changed that. He reminded me I still had something left to give. And you showed me that the scars we carry can become the foundation of something beautiful. Dominic's grip tightened, life returning to eyes long emptied of it. Then, he began. But Claire was already nodding, smiling through her tears. I'll stay. Not just for Eli, because I choose this family. I choose you. Dominic lowered his head and pressed a kiss to her forehead, tender and reverent, as though afraid to disturb the fragile miracle between them. That night, in a house once known only for blood and power, something entirely new was born, not through lineage, but through love, forgiveness, and the courage to begin again. The next morning, sunlight streamed softly into the Bennett estate, as though the once cold and somber mansion itself had begun to learn tenderness to open its heart again. Claire descended the grand staircase wearing the cream-colored sweater Linda had folded neatly outside her door. There was nothing extravagant about her appearance, yet each step carried a quiet gravity. In the great hall below, Dominic was leaning down, speaking softly to Eli, who was animatedly signing back at him, his face bright as morning light. Claire paused on the steps, simply watching the warmth in her chest, deepening with every heartbeat. She was no longer an outsider, no longer the accidental visitor in their world. She was part of it now, not just as the woman who helped Eli communicate, but as the one Dominic had chosen to love, to trust, and to help protect the boy who had once lived behind walls of silence. Dominic looked up when he noticed her. His gaze no longer held the guarded caution of a man scarred by loss, but the peace of someone who had finally found home, Claire stepped closer without a word and extended her hand to Eli. The boy smiled, placed his small hand in hers, then turned to Dominic and signed with both hands. Family. Claire nodded, gathering him into her arms before looking at Dominic. Her eyes steady and full. I'm ready. Dominic didn't speak. He simply reached up and brushed his hand through her hair, a gesture that carried both gratitude and promise. And in that moment, without vows or papers, they were a family, a real one. For the first time in years, the fortress that had once stood for power and fear was filled with laughter, the sound of a child playing, the scent of dinner cooking, and the quiet comfort of three people sharing silence without loneliness. No one among them was alone anymore. Autumn came. The first maple leaves drifted across the stone path, leading to the estate. One crisp morning, as dawn painted the horizon gold, Eli woke early. His small feet pattered along the long corridor, clutching his sketchbook and a handful of colored pebbles. He stopped before the front gate, where old Mr. Jones, the gatekeeper who had served the Bennets for nearly 20 years, stood with his usual posture. Arms crossed, eyes watchful, but when he saw Eli, his expression softened instantly. He leaned down, smiling, and nodded. Good morning, young man. Eli didn't answer aloud, as always, but approached with that same sparkle of mischief and joy in his eyes. He opened his sketchbook and held up a page filled with simple drawings, 3 figures standing side by side, one tall, one medium, one very small. Above them, a pair of hands formed a circle placed over a chest. Mr. Jones frowned, tilting his head. Unsure, Eli repeated the motion slowly, clearly then placed his hand over his own heart and pointed toward him. Family. The old man froze, his eyes blinking rapidly. He had never learned sign language, but in that moment, he understood everything. Through the years he had guarded these gates. He'd seen Dominic's grief, the boy's quiet isolation, the endless comings and goings of strangers, but never this. Never Eli reaching outward. Eli stepped forward, took the old man's weathered hand, placed it over his chest, and signed again. Family. He was no longer the boy trapped in silence. He was teaching the world to hear him and to feel him. Mr. Jones bent down, clumsy but earnest, and copied the gesture. Family, he whispered. The word resonated between them like a prayer. This family was finally complete. Upstairs, Claire sat by the window, the afternoon light turning the sheer curtains gold. Before her lay an old leather-bound journal, its pages faintly scented with tea and lavender. Line by line, she wrote in the steady, thoughtful rhythm that had carried her through so many sleepless nights. Today, Eli taught Mr. Jones the sign for family. I watched from the balcony. His eyes shone with a light I once believed I would never see again. A year ago, I didn't think I'd still be alive to see another sunrise. I buried my daughter on a cold afternoon, and with her, I buried my faith in love, in people, and in myself. She paused, the fingers brushing the faint scar along her ribs, the one that had caught the bullet meant for Eli. Not every wound is an ending. Some open doors we never knew existed. For her, that door had led to a silent boy, a broken man, and a home that once felt suffocating but now sheltered her heart. She wrote again, her handwriting softening. I don't know if destiny is real, but I believe in the meetings that aren't accidents. I believe that kindness, no matter how small, creates paths we could never find alone. A quiet nod across the air, a glance that sees what others overlook. These are the things that change lives. Claire closed the journal, resting her hand on its cover, as if in silent gratitude to the past for hurting enough to make her cherish the present. From below, Eli's laughter rang out pure, bright, and boundless. She smiled through tears, knowing her journey had finally found its home. One calm morning in the garden behind the Bennett estate, sunlight spilled softly over the emerald grass, brushing against the lavender that swayed in the early breeze. Claire sat on a wooden bench beneath the great oak tree, an open book in her hands, but her eyes fixed on the boy running through the garden. Eli, dressed in a crisp white shirt and blue overalls, was playing with the small puppy Dominic had given him for his birthday. He turned suddenly, his dark eyes gleaming with joy. And then, for the first time, his lips parted. "Mom," the word fragile, perfect, cut through the quiet air. Claire froze. Her heart burst open. She ran to him, gathering him into her arms, tears streaming freely as she pressed her face into his hair, whispering over and over, "I'm here. Sweetheart, I'm here." From the terrace, Dominic stood watching. The man who had once ruled with silence and fear now stood in sunlight, his expression softened by something almost divine: love, pride, peace. Eli looked up, eyes glistening, and ran into his father's arms. "Dad." Dominic knelt, embracing his son, his jaw trembling, his eyes wet. There was no more sign language between them, no barriers, no silence, only words simple, sacred words that made them whole. The story of Claire, Dominic, and Eli was never a fairy tale. It was a journey through loss, through pain, through the fragile courage it takes to walk out of darkness and into light. It was proof that kindness, however small, it can save a soul, and that love doesn't need blood to grow. It only needs understanding, honesty, and the courage to reach out when the world feels too quiet. If you've stayed with this story until now, thank you for listening, for feeling. How did it touch you? Have you ever witnessed or lived a moment like Eli's, being heard, being loved, and finally calling someone family? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from your heart. And if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share the video so more people can find warmth in stories like this. Underworld Love Stories will continue bringing you heartfelt, powerful tales of love, loss, and redemption. Tap the bell so you never miss a story. May you who are watching have health, peace, joy, and light in every corner of your life. Until next time,